Come in from the cold tonight, let the door close soft behind you, and rest here with me for a while. This is the Mercy Vine, a home for tired hearts, and tonight, we are going to walk together through an old story about a vineyard, a quiet man, and the slow, patient love of God. There was a man named Elias who kept a small vineyard at the edge of a valley, where the hills folded gently into one another like the hands of someone praying. He had inherited the land from his father, who had inherited it from his father before him, and for as long as anyone could remember, the family had lived by one simple rhythm: plant, tend, wait, trust. Elias was not a young man anymore. His hands were rough with years of pruning vines, and his back had learned the particular ache of bending low to check the roots after a hard rain. But there was something steady in him, something that did not shake even when the skies did not cooperate, even when the harvest came in thin. His neighbors often asked him how he stayed so calm through the lean years. Elias would only smile and say that a long time ago, he had stopped trying to control the vineyard, and started simply listening to it. You see, Elias hadn't always been this way. There was a season, many years back, when a terrible drought swept through the valley. The wells ran low. The other farmers panicked, some of them uprooting entire rows of vines to try new methods, chasing rumors of better soil 3 villages over, gambling everything on their own understanding of what might save them. Elias felt that same fear rising in his chest too, that tightening, that urge to fix everything himself, right now, with his own 2 hands. He remembered lying awake at night during that drought, staring at the ceiling of his small stone house, wondering if he had been foolish to stay rooted when everyone else was running. It was his grandmother who had once told him something he carried with him for the rest of his life. She had said that obedience was never about rules, it was about love. Not a cold list of do's and don'ts, but a relationship, the kind where you trust someone so completely that when they ask you to wait, you wait, not because you're forced to, but because you know their heart toward you is good. So one evening, in the middle of that drought, Elias walked out into his failing vineyard and simply knelt in the dry dirt between 2 rows of thirsty vines. He didn't have any grand words. He just told God the truth, that he was afraid, that he didn't understand why the rain had stopped, and that he was choosing, even now, to stay planted. Not because he had it all figured out, but because somewhere deep in his spirit, he believed that the one who made the rain still remembered him. That night, nothing changed outwardly. The sky stayed dry. The wells stayed low. But something shifted quietly inside Elias, a peace that didn't make logical sense given his circumstances. It was a peace that didn't come from the weather improving, it came from trusting the one who holds the weather. If you're listening tonight, and your own life feels a little like that dry season, maybe finances have been tight, maybe your body is tired, maybe someone you love has drifted far from you. I want you to know that you're not foolish for staying planted. You're not weak for choosing to trust when you can't see the outcome yet. Elias often said that the hardest obedience isn't the loud kind, it's the quiet kind. Staying kind when you've been wounded. Staying honest when a lie would be easier. Staying faithful in your small daily choices, when no one else is watching, when no applause is coming. He used to whisper to his sons, as he tucked the youngest into bed at night, that God doesn't measure a life by how impressive it looked to the neighbors. God measures it by the quiet, unseen moments where a heart chose him anyway. Years later, after the drought finally broke and the rains returned, softening the cracked earth back into something workable again, Elias's vineyard came back stronger than it had ever been before. Not because he had some clever new technique. Simply because the roots, having gone so deep in that dry season searching for water, were now anchored far beneath the surface, anchored in a way that made the vines nearly unshakable in the storms that followed. That's often how it works, isn't it? The deepest seasons of trust are the ones that plant our roots the furthest down. Rest for a moment here with me, breathe out slowly, and know that wherever you are tonight, however dry the season feels, you are still being tended to, by hands far more patient and far more loving than you could ever fully imagine. Elias had 2 sons, Thomas, the elder, steady like his father, and Josiah, the younger, restless in the way that young men often are, always looking toward some far horizon he couldn't quite name. Josiah loved the vineyard well enough, but he didn't understand his father's calm. He would ask, almost with frustration in his voice, why his father didn't just try harder, work longer hours, buy more land, chase the bigger opportunities the other farmers were chasing 3 villages over. Elias would only put a gentle hand on his son's shoulder and say that there was a difference between working hard and striving in fear. One trusted the process, the other tried to control an outcome that was never truly ours to control in the first place. One autumn, a merchant came through the valley offering an enormous sum for Elias's land, enough money to secure the family for generations. Josiah was practically breathless with excitement, certain this was the answer to every worry his father had ever carried. But Elias sat with it quietly for 3 days before giving his answer. He walked the rows of vines each evening, running his fingers over the bark, remembering the drought, remembering the way the roots had gone deep. And on the 3rd night, he told the merchant no. Josiah couldn't understand it. He nearly wept with frustration, asking his father why he would turn away such an obvious blessing. Elias sat him down under the old fig tree near the house, the one that had shaded 3 generations of this family's evening conversations, and he said something Josiah would carry with him the rest of his life. He said that not every open door is meant to be walked through, and that discerning the difference requires something the world rarely teaches anymore, patience, and a willingness to listen for a voice quieter than your own ambition. If you've ever had to say no to something that looked like the answer to all your prayers, you understand exactly what Elias was carrying that night. It would be almost 2 years later before the reason became clear. The land the merchant had wanted to buy sat directly in the path of a terrible flood that swept through the lower valley, destroying nearly everything built on that soil. Elias's vineyard, higher up on the gentler slope, remained untouched. Josiah came to his father afterward, quiet now, humbled, and simply sat beside him without a word. Elias didn't say "I told you so." He just wrapped an arm around his son's shoulders and let the silence hold what words couldn't. That's the strange shape of trust sometimes. It rarely announces itself as wisdom in the moment. It only reveals its kindness looking backward. Before we continue tonight, if this story is giving your heart a little rest, it would mean so much if you take a quiet moment to subscribe here at the Mercy Vine. Not for numbers, not for anything loud, simply so more tired hearts like yours can find their way to a little peace like this. Then let's keep walking together. Josiah changed after the flood. Not dramatically, not overnight, but there was a new gentleness in the way he tended the vines, a new patience in the way he waited for his father's counsel instead of rushing ahead of it. He began to understand what Elias had tried to tell him all those years, that Jesus does not ask for obedience because he wishes to withhold joy from us. He asks for it because he can see the flood we cannot yet see, and he is already making a way around it. There is something so tender in that thought, isn't there, that even in the moments we don't understand, even in the closed doors that feel like rejection, even in the waiting that feels endless, there is a nail-scarred hand quietly rearranging the path ahead of us, keeping us from harm we were never even aware of. Josiah began waking early, before the sun fully rose over the hills, just to sit at the edge of the vineyard in the stillness. He said later that those quiet mornings taught him more about God's presence than any sermon ever had. Not because anything spectacular happened. Just the wind through the vines. The color slowly returning to the sky. And a peace settling over him that felt less like an emotion and more like a person. If your own mornings feel heavy right now, if waking up has become its own small battle, I want you to know that presence is not something you have to chase down or perform your way into. It's already near you. Closer than your next breath. Waiting patiently for you to simply sit still long enough to notice it. There came a season, some years after the flood, when sickness moved through the valley. It didn't spare anyone's household completely, coughs that lingered too long, fevers that came and went without explanation, an unease that settled over the whole community like a fog that refused to lift. Elias's wife, Miriam, fell ill during that time, and for many weeks, her strength seemed to be draining away faster than anyone could account for. Elias sat beside her bed most nights, holding her hand, not saying much, because sometimes there simply aren't words big enough for the moment you're in. He had learned, over all those years of tending vines through drought and flood, that faith isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to stay present with God even while the fear is still there, sitting uninvited in the room with you. One evening, Miriam, weak but lucid, asked her husband if he was afraid. She wouldn't recover. Elias was quiet for a long moment before answering honestly, yes, he told her, some nights the fear presses in hard. But he said something else too, something that had settled deep into his bones over the years, that his fear didn't need to be resolved before his trust could remain steady. He could hold both at once, the trembling and the trusting, and let God be big enough to carry them together. If you are sitting with someone you love tonight, or if you yourself are the one who is weary in body or spirit, I want you to hear this gently. It is not a failure of faith to feel afraid. Even the most faithful hearts in Scripture wept, questioned, and trembled. What matters is not the absence of fear, but where you turn while you're still afraid. Miriam's healing did not come suddenly. It came slowly, the way most true healing does, a little more strength each week, a little more color returning to her face, small mercies stacking quietly on top of each other until one morning she was able to walk out to the fig tree on her own 2 feet again. Elias later said that this slow healing taught him something the sudden miracles never could have, that God's timing, even when it feels unbearably slow, is never wasted. Every long night sitting at her bedside had deepened something between them, and deepened something in Elias's relationship with the Lord too. Suffering, walked through with an open hand instead of a clenched fist, has a strange way of making room for a peace that wasn't there before. There's a passage that speaks of God's law giving great peace to those who love it, so that nothing shall cause them to stumble, and Elias understood now, in a way he never could have simply from hearing it preached, that this peace isn't a shield against hard seasons. It's a steadiness that walks straight through the middle of them, holding you upright when your own strength runs completely dry. If your own healing feels slow tonight, if you've been praying the same prayer for months, maybe even years, and the answer hasn't come the way you hoped, please don't mistake the silence for absence. Some of the deepest work God does is beneath the surface, in the root systems of our lives, long before we ever see it break through the soil. Miriam, once she was strong again, began quietly visiting other households in the valley who were still walking through their own sicknesses. She didn't bring advice or answers. She simply sat with people the way Elias had sat with her, present, honest about her own fear, but steady in the quiet confidence that they were not walking alone. Several of the older women in the valley later said that Miriam's visits felt less like a person and more like being wrapped in a warm blanket on a cold night, an unexplainable comfort that lingered long after she'd gone home. That is, perhaps, the truest evidence of a life shaped by obedience, not loud proclamations, not impressive achievements, but a presence that leaves people feeling a little more held, a little less alone, long after the conversation has ended. Rest here for a moment, let your shoulders drop, let your breathing slow. Whatever weight you've been carrying into tonight, you don't have to carry it alone under these covers. There is a presence near you right now, closer than you think, patient enough to sit with you exactly as long as you need. Winter came early that year, the way it sometimes does in the valley, frost settling over the vines for the last of the leaves had even finished turning. Elias walked the rows each morning wrapped in his father's old wool coat, checking each vine for damage, running his thumb along the bark the way he'd done for decades. Thomas, now grown with children of his own, often walked beside him in those cold mornings, mostly in comfortable silence. It was during one of these walks that Thomas finally asked his father the question that had been sitting in him for years: how did he keep trusting, season after season, when the outcomes were never guaranteed? Elias stopped walking for a moment, looked out over the frost-covered vines catching the first light of morning, and said that trust was never really about the vineyard at all. It was about the vinedresser. The vines don't control the weather, they don't control the harvest, they don't even really control their own growth. All they do is stay attached to the vine, and let the rest be handled by hands far more capable than their own. There's an old teaching that says apart from the vine, the branches can do nothing, and Elias had come to believe, deep in the marrow of his life, that this wasn't a burden at all. It was actually the most restful truth a person could hold on to. He didn't have to manufacture his own strength. He didn't have to force his own growth. He simply had to stay close, stay rooted, stay attached, and trust that the life flowing through the vine would produce whatever fruit was needed, in its own perfect timing. Thomas asked if that meant his father never worried anymore. Elias laughed softly, the kind of laugh that carries a lifetime of honesty in it, and admitted that worry still visited sometimes, uninvited, the way an old neighbor might knock at an inconvenient hour. But he had learned not to let worry move in and unpack its bags. He would notice it, acknowledge it, and then gently turn his attention back to the one who had never once, in all these years, failed to bring the vineyard through. If worry has been knocking at your door again tonight, you don't have to let it move in either. You can notice it standing there, acknowledge that it's real, and still choose to turn your face back toward the presence that has carried you through every hard season before this one. That winter passed the way winters do, slowly, then all at once, giving way to the first soft signs of spring. New buds appeared along the vines, fragile and small, but undeniably alive. Elias would often just stand at the edge of the vineyard in the early spring evenings, watching the light stretch longer across the hills, feeling something settle in his chest that he could only describe as gratitude too deep for words. He had lived through drought. He had lived through flood. He had sat beside a sickbed not knowing if his wife would recover. And through every single season, the vineyard, and his own heart, had continued forward, not because he had forced it forward through sheer willpower, but because he had stayed rooted in something steady enough to hold him through seasons he never could have controlled on his own. There is a kind of peace that only comes from having walked through the fire and found that you were never once alone in it. Elias carried that peace differently than he had as a younger man. It wasn't loud or triumphant. It was quiet, settled, the peace of someone who has stopped needing to understand every detail of the road ahead, because he trusts complete. Ly in the one who is walking it with him. Miriam joined him one evening at the edge of the vineyard, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cool spring air. She rested her head against his shoulder, and for a long while, neither of them said anything at all. They simply watched the sun lower itself gently behind the hills, painting the sky in soft gold, the kind of color that feels like a quiet promise being kept. Elias finally spoke, his voice low, almost a whisper. He said that he used to think obedience was about proving something, proving his faith, proving his worth, proving that he deserved whatever blessings came his way. But now, standing here after all these years, he understood it so differently. Obedience wasn't proving anything at all. It was simply love, responding to love. A quiet yes, offered again and again, to a God who had already said yes to him long before he ever deserved it. If you're listening tonight, and your own heart has been carrying that same misunderstanding, believing that your worth is tied to how well you perform, how perfectly you follow every rule, I want you to let that weight down gently tonight. You are not loved because you obey. You are invited to obey, gently, patiently, because you are already so deeply loved. Let your eyes rest now, let your breathing slow further, and know that wherever your own vineyard sits tonight, however uncertain the season feels, there is a steady hand tending to you, patient enough to walk with you through every winter until spring finds its way back to your life too. Years pass the way seasons do, quietly, faithfully, one folding gently into the next. Elias grew old in that vineyard, his hair turning the same soft gray as the winter frost he had walked through so many times. Josiah took on more of the daily work as his father's hands grew slower, and Thomas's own children began learning the rows the same way their father and grandfather had, running small fingers along the bark, learning patience before they even understood the word. One evening, near the very end of his life, Elias asked to be carried out to the edge of the vineyard one last time. Josiah and Thomas helped him to his old wooden chair beneath the fig tree, the same tree that had shaded 3 generations of quiet conversations. Miriam sat beside him, her hand resting in his the way it had for over 50 years. Elias looked out over the vines, glowing soft gold in the last light of evening, and he told his sons something neither of them ever forgot. He said that he had spent his whole life believing the vineyard was the thing he was tending. But now, at the end of it all, he understood the truth had always been the other way around. The vineyard had been tending him, teaching him, season after season, how to trust a hand more capable than his own. Every drought had deepened his roots. Every flood had revealed a mercy he couldn't yet see in the moment. Every long winter had taught him that stillness is not the same as abandonment. He told them that obedience was never about earning a good life. It was about walking closely with the vinedresser that you started, slowly, to trust his pruning even when it hurt, to trust his silence even when it felt unbearable, and to trust his timing even when the fruit seemed painfully slow to come. Josiah asked his father, gently, if he was afraid of what came next. Elias smiled, a smile that held no fear in it at all, and said that after a lifetime of learning to trust the one who sends the rain, the one who calms the flood, the one who sits beside the sickbed through the longest nights, he had no reason to be afraid of the next season either. He was simply going home, to the same steady, patient presence that had walked every single row of his life with him. He closed his eyes there under the fig tree, with his family gathered close, the golden light settling gently over the vineyard he had tended, and that had tended him, for nearly 60 years. If you're listening tonight, and some part of your own story feels like a long winter that hasn't ended yet, I want you to hold on to this. The seasons of your life are not wasted, even the hard ones. Especially the hard ones. Every root that goes down deep in a dry season becomes the very thing that holds you steady when the storms return. You are not forgotten in your waiting. You are not distant from His presence in your silence. You are being tended, patiently, by hands that have never once let go of you. Wherever you are tonight, however tired your heart feels, however uncertain your own vineyard looks right now, let yourself rest in this truth. The same presence that walked with Elias through drought, through flood, through sickness, and through the quiet slowness of healing, is sitting with you too, right now, in this very moment. Let your body sink deeper into the bed. Let your breathing slow. Let every worry you carried into tonight loosen its grip, just a little, as you remember that you are held, you are known, and you are deeply, endlessly loved. Rest now. You are safe here. And whenever you wake, the same steady hand that has carried you through every season before this one, will still be right there, waiting patiently to carry you through the next. Good night.